Complicated Creation by Elemental. Chapter 9, Break the Ice. Izuku's still not sure about any of this, but Aizawa now. He has a name now. He keeps saying he has it all figured out, and it isn't so much that Izuku wants to trust him as Izuku wants it to be true. If there's some way to make this better, he wants it. He doesn't want to be cold all winter and know how hungry someone can get and smell like cigarette smoke and alcohol when he has a roof over his head and be covered in bug bites when he doesn't. Those things were always just better than the alternatives, but now Aizawa is offering him something else and Izuku is afraid, sure, but while he isn't strong, he's not such a coward as to run away from this without trying. And besides, he doesn't have anything like enough power to run right now anyway. It'll be a few days before he can. Modifying quirks and interacting with spirits doesn't take much, but fighting and travel are draining as hell. So if Aizawa has a plan, he might as well not argue with it, right? He's just considering his options. The flight is uneventful, so much so that he falls asleep on it, dozing for an hour before they land, and Aizawa puts them in a cab to go home instead of taking the train. Izuku wonders about that, if maybe he's trying to help him avoid people. But then again, Aizawa looks worse than Izuku does, so maybe he wants to avoid people for himself. Izuku drifts off once more and wakes in Musutafu. They step out into the late afternoon air, and Izuku finds himself looking at an unassuming house across from some low-rise apartments in a quiet-looking neighborhood. Tamamo no Mei is waiting for him by the front gate. She declined to keep pace with the car or plane. "Everyone is waiting for you both," she says, and sure enough, the front door opens a moment later and Present Mike, though he's in his civilian clothes, appears and rushes down the path to look at Aizawa over the gate. The two of them have a moment where they just stare. Aizawa unblinking, Present Mike looking Aizawa up and down repeatedly before finally sighing in relief. "Thank goodness!" "You didn't believe me." Aizawa motions for Mike to open the gate, which he does. "I'd say I'm hurt, but you just take that literally." He's pretty good at the deadpan. Izuku laughs. "This is Deku," Aizawa continues, hand instantly on Izuku's back. "Deku, this is Hisashi Yamada, though you know him as Present Mike." "Hey there, little listener!" Yamada says, the voice so familiar, it makes Izuku smile. "You can call me Hisashi if you want." That's so incredibly informal for a hero. Izuku sputters and Aizawa saves him by nudging them all forward. "Let's get inside before Ashtray makes a break for it." "Ashtray?" Izuku follows them up the steps. "We have cats," Aizawa says and adds almost as an afterthought, but he's frowning with worry. "You're not allergic, are you?" "I don't think so. I never had a cat, but I've pet them before, and that's been okay." "Well, we'll find out soon enough." Izuku's offered a pair of house slippers once inside, and the home is nice. Aizawa all but drags him to the kitchen, past Hitoshi, who waves and pretends to focus on his phone, but Izuku can tell he's watching Aizawa intently. The dark circles under his eyes look worse than before, too. "Just as you ordered," Yamada, Hisashi, says, gesturing to the takeout bags on the counter. "Ramen from your favorite place, and enough side dishes to feed a whole class." Aizawa nods at the bags next to Izuku. "Help me unpack this. I don't care if we didn't get hungry before. I feel like I haven't eaten in 4 days. "Oh, yeah, that gets kind of weird, especially when I stay a while." Izuku agrees while helping load the table up with an impressive amount of food. "I didn't know what you'd like," Aizawa tells him when he and Yamada unload other bags. "And I know these two probably ignored food while I was gone, so there'll be enough for all 4 of us, and you can just pick up what you want." Izuku's mouth is watering. Everything smells so good. And yet it feels wrong somehow. He'd kind of sort of kidnapped Aizawa and left them to worry for 4 days, and he'd attacked Itoshi at the police station, and now they're sitting around a table with a mound of food, and Itoshi and Yamada are looking at him expectantly, and Aizawa is giving him a pointed look at the food, and Izuku really wants to eat, but he's suddenly nauseous. Hitoshi taps him gently on the shoulder, but he still startles up. The other boy doesn't seem surprised at all and blinks laconically. "Bathroom is next to the front door." Izuku mutters a quick excuse and runs for it before he can forget how to breathe. He doesn't have anything in his stomach to throw up, so he just sits on the toilet with his face in his hands and gets all of 3 seconds apiece before a spirit prods his knee with a claw.
If they're going to let you stay here, you better not mess things up, Corruptor.
The mental voice is a genderless croak. Izuku looks up to see a kappa. No, it's Present Mike's spirit. He's seen it once before, just a glimpse of it next to the hero when he'd been at a mall reopening his mother had taken him to. It's short and green and angry looking, and wearing a metal cap to protect its Sara, turtle-beaked mouth snapping at him menacingly.
I'm not going to put up with you making this place a mess, monster child.
Tamamonome's head comes through the bathroom wall, and she simply takes the cap up by the shell, shakes it a few times like a cat with a kill, and then throws it away! Izuku giggles, more a release of tension than anything else, and Tamamonome regards him with baleful eyes, only her head and shoulders fitting in the small bathroom and the rest of her elsewhere. She nudges him in the chest with her nose. Why did you run? You must eat. I don't know. Izuku tentatively reaches to brush a hand against her head, and when she closes her eyes and leans into it, he strokes her fur a bit more intentionally. It just doesn't feel right. To eat a meal with friends? For them to be okay with me? Izuku shrugs. I'm not a friend. I don't belong here. There's a knock on the bathroom door. Eraser. Aizawa's voice is quiet through the wall. You all right in their problem, child? At least I lived up to my name, he tells Tamamonome miserably. She nudges him with her snout hard. Hey! Give them a chance, young kid, she tells him firmly. Give them a chance to give you a chance as well. Or my human will chase you all over Japan, and I will find a way to help him. Dogu. Aizawa knocks again. I'm okay. Izuku leans back and stares up at the ceiling. She's scolding me at the moment. Sounds like you're in good hands then. Aizawa offers, which makes Izuku laugh. Still would like you to come and eat, but if you need some space, I can make you a plate and we can sit on the balcony. I don't know what to say to them, Izuku admits, hands still buried in the kitsune's soft fur. What if they don't believe me? Not me worried about that. I told you I had a plan, didn't I? And Aizawa did say that several times, and Izuku wants to know, but at the same time, he's afraid. Trust him, Tamamonome says. But you do not have to do so blindly. What? I said. No, I was talking to Tamamonome. Sorry. Izuku laughs awkwardly again and opens the bathroom door. Ask him, the spirit says as she moves out of the way. Izuku looks up at Aizawa, who looks down at him, concerned. Aizawa trusted him when he dragged the hero through the spirit realm. He can try to do the same here. She says I should ask you what your plan is, because I'm scared. Aizawa nods slowly. All right. I was going to run it past you after we ate, but we can talk it over now while we find you a change of clothing. Shed some. He calls out to be heard. We're raiding your closet. Touch my young cat hoodie and die, is the response called back as Yamada giggles. Come on, and tell Tamamonome we'll need her too. Aizawa gestures for Izuku to follow him upstairs. We can workshop my plan and you can shower and get changed, and then you can eat something. I don't want you at the precinct on an empty stomach. The quirk suppression cuffs click shut around his wrists, and Izuku breathes in and out as steadily as he can. Still with me? Aizawa asks him quietly, and Izuku looks up into his eyes and sees Tamamonome behind him, human-looking. He didn't even know she could do that until she changed forms in Hitoshi's room and laughed at his surprise. We'll make this quick. Izuku nods. He really wishes he'd skipped dinner because they're back at Hisamatsu police station, just like when all this started. And while it is at the same interrogation room, this one is bigger, it has the added stress of a lot more people in it. And spirits. Everyone is staring at them as Aizawa has him cuffed in the back of the room, away from the table where they all sit waiting. There's the detective from before with the orange cat spirit, Hitoshi and Zar, Yamada and his kappa, all varying degrees of familiar. There's also the R-rated hero Midnight, who has an American-style naga, Gorgon, he thinks, as a spirit draped in silk and hundreds of snakes for hair. That spirit had taken one look at Izuku and hissed with all of her snakes, and then Tamamo no Me had said something to her privately, and she just vanished. Izuku is going to take that as a win. Of course, then there's Mr. Principal of UA, sitting at a cup of tea, spiritless at the moment. Izuku's grateful. He gets the sense his spirit is probably something terrifying and huge. As debriefings go, this is going to be one of the oddest I've done, the detective says. Tsukuuchi, Izuku recalls with some effort. But we're all here, Eraserhead, and we all want to know what happened and what this is about. Aizawa stands beside Deku, hand on his shoulder for support. Right. The man nods at the group. Well, you're not going to like the answers much, but you're a man who prides himself on the truth, so we'll start with this. Everything Deku here told us months ago was true. He's not a Nomu, doesn't have anything to do with any of the villain groups, and by all accounts, quirks really are spirits. Izuku ducks his head as Tsukuuchi gives Aizawa a look of disbelief. What? It's going to be easier if I show you, Aizawa says and nods to Izuku. Okay, problem child. Izuku looks to Tamamo no Me, who nods back at him. He holds out his cuffed hands, and Aizawa rolls up his sleeves and wipes at the sigil there with an alcohol wipe. It leaves him helpless. A week ago, he'd never willingly do this. Last time he'd been here, he'd been caught without, and it had been bad. But he trusts Aizawa and Tamamo no Me to protect him. He trusts them enough to sound steady when he nods at the hero and even manages a weak smile. Ready? There is so much trust he's been given, Shota knows, and he's going to make it count. Right. Midnight, would you use your quirk on Deku, please? Her eyebrows rise above her mask, but she stands and reaches for the kid, curious but trusting in Shota and the favor he'd called in to have her come in. He owes her a full month of grading at this point, but worth it. He's got to stack the deck here. Deku doesn't try to fight her quirk, and he's so clearly overexhausted that he's asleep in Kayama's arms in moments, quickly enough that she croons in amusement as he curls in her grip. She runs a thumb under Deku's bruised eyes for a moment. No doubt she can see just as well as Shota can that the kid's not in the best shape, and then she looks up at him. What exactly does all of this have to do with you disappearing for 4 days? You weren't involved with our first interaction with Deku, he tells her, and looks instead to Tsukuuchi. But you saw the report we put out after the fact. We thought Deku might be a person of interest. What we actually thought was that he might be the result of genetic or quirk manipulation, an escapee from one of the League's twisted labs. He tried to tell us the truth, but it was so improbable, we assumed he was brainwashed. He told us quirks were the results of magical spirits, Tsukuuchi points out. You're suggesting that's true. I'm saying it is true, and it's provable. Or at least something close enough to it is. Aizawa points to Deku. He's asleep, he's cuffed, and Aizawa activates his own quirk. I'm suppressing his quirk. By any statement, he shouldn't be able to do anything. Agreed? Izashi frowns. Didn't you think he had an accomplice? Shota nods. We did, but that never entirely made sense to me, and it really isn't going to make sense now. Tamamo no Me? He asks and hopes this works the way they tried it in Shinso's room. Gently. He watches as Deku seems to float out of Kayama's lap, knees and shoulders high and legs dangling. He knows why. He can imagine the shape of the spirit holding Deku in her arms, a spirit working with them and not against them, even as the whole room stares and Hisashi pushes up from his chair in surprise. Tsukuuchi is immediately moving in on Deku. He comes around the table and reaches out to find nothing under the kid or around the kid. There's no invisible person, Shota points out, though I did think that at first. It doesn't actually make sense. I have an invisible student, and I can usually guess where she is, what she's doing. There's a sense you have when there's someone around, even invisibly. We could have an incorporeal person like Muriel, but how are they also invisible? Incapable of holding Deku up. And if you're going to suggest that someone has a telekinesis quirk that works without line of sight, and from a distance far enough to be outside the precinct, that's a stretch, but an understandable stretch. Don't worry, we can go one further. Shota pulls out an empty chair. The spirit carries him to it and settles him down, and Shota pushes the chair in and arranges Deku's sleeping form to lay forward on the table with his cuffed hands out to the side.
Write a question in your notebook,
he tells Tsukuyoshi, stepping back.
then put the notepad and pen in his hands.
Aizawa, what? Shota sighs.
This is the sort of thing that is going to take time, I'm aware, so let's just get the basics out of the way first, alright?
He points to Deku.
Just do it.
Tsukuyoshi obliges. Shota keeps away from line of sight of the book and what question is written, and the pad is set by Deku's hands. A moment later, they very clumsily pick up the pen, and one hand curls around it in the way it might if someone else were moving the fingers. The written response is hardly neat, but the movements are quite definite.
Eraserhead.
Nezu has not moved from his seat. Neither has Shinso, for that matter.
Are you going to explain matters, or is this simply to be a series of fascinating tests with no clear goal?
The point is, we could do this in the quirk dampening cell. We could put Deku in a coma, I'm guessing in Tartarus, and we could do this. At this point, we either have to assume he has under his control a teleportation quirk, a recording interference quirk, the ability to modify quirks, the ability to cancel quirks, the ability to float, and the ability to move and hear and read while asleep. With the toe giant, I'll add, all while wearing quirk-suppressing cuffs, and while I've been canceling him. Or...
Aizawa blinks dry eyes as his own quirk ends.
There's something else going on.
Magic, Aizawa, Tsukuyoshi asks, but it doesn't sound half so disbelieving now. He's staring at his notebook and whatever was written there.
Don't call it magic if it bugs you. I don't like it, but I don't have a better name for it yet. Quirks are basically magic we've attached the evolution label to, even though we barely understand them. The point is, this kid isn't what we thought he was and can do things we thought were impossible yesterday. And he needs help.
Nezu's intelligent eyes seem to light up. What do you mean by that exactly?
I mean, at the end of the day.
Shota shakes his head.
At the end of the day, something he told me at the start of our little adventure is true. That what he can't see doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. What he knows about how quirks work could be important if we could get enough people to believe it. But at the end of the day, it won't change the vast majority of any of our lives, and the process would destroy him. It doesn't matter where our quirks come from for most of the world. What matters is if we have them, and if they work.
Shota pulls out the chair next to Deku and sits down. Tsukuyoshi has no choice but to do the same.
This is a kid who has a power that has immense potential for harm, who has spent his whole life desperately trying not to. He could have turned against all of us at any time, but he didn't, because at his core he wants to do good, and the world hasn't done him any favors. I'm saying I watched him give a young girl with a broken emitter quirk the ability to turn her quirk on and off at will, then stop her asthma attack, and he didn't think any of that was anything special.
The whole room stares at Shota. They're listening. Good.
I'm saying we need to look after him, and that means we need to believe him. Even if that means you have to think of it as his quirk lets him see quirks as manifestations of power and occasionally can use them for himself. We have literally faced Stranger. All for One, for example.
You're saying this kid has magic? Kayama leans into Deku, who's still sound asleep. Shota figures he probably needs it. He looks so cute like this. How can anyone think he was a Namen?
It was a working theory, Tsukuyoshi points out, a little defensive, given what we knew at the time. Now we know better, and so we need to do better. The point of all this is to give you an idea of what I'm calling his reality, because it's different from ours, and it's still very real, and if you don't understand it, the rest of my report is going to sound absolutely insane.
Shota lifts one shoulder at the detective when he's given a concerned look.
Hizashi and Shinso are here because they need to understand, because I'm keeping Deku with us for as long as he'll willingly stay. Kayama, everyone understands your quirk, and it's safer than trying to drug him, especially right now. And Nezu?
Shota meets the principal's gaze and suspects he doesn't need to say anything. He already knows.
Once we know where Deku is and have him caught up, I'm sponsoring him for UA.
Excellent.
Nezu presses his fingertips together.
I'm sure he'll be a very interesting addition to our student body.
It's to protect him,
Shota says with such intensity Everyone pauses.
I mean it. We were worried about it being the product of villains. Well, imagine what they could do with someone who can permanently manipulate quirks. We don't need another All for One.
Everyone looks at Deku, still asleep.
Are you seriously worried this kid is going to turn into the world's next big bad while he's drooling on the table?
Shinso asks sharply.
Because that seems a bit hypocritical. No.
Shota meets Shinso's gaze and doesn't flinch.
I'm saying, if Shigaraki or the next Chisaki find out about Deku, he's going to suffer if we aren't careful, and the kid's suffered enough.
Tsukuuchi leans back in his chair, thoughtful.
So how do you think we should proceed?
Shota reaches over and gently shakes Deku awake, which actually takes some effort. While Deku blinks, Shota uncuffs him and hands him a marker, which Deku uses to immediately draw on himself. While he does so, Shota continues his longest pre-debrief in history.
I'm saying we register him with a baseline quirk. Call it quirk personification, power registration, quirk analysis, I don't care. But get him registered so that there's paperwork, and then we close his case and let him be an actual kid again. Train him.
Do you want to be a hero, Deku?
Nezu asks, warm and interested.
I think someone with your skill set could certainly be an interesting one.
Deku looks at the principal and then back to Shota.
I don't know. I did when I was a kid, but a lot of what I can do is limited and hurting spirits because their humans are making trouble. I don't know.
He shakes his head and looks at his hands.
I thought maybe I could be a quirk therapist. Someone who helps people when their quirks are too much for them, or don't work in a way that they understand. Or if someone tries to make those bullets again, I could help with that. I could fix things. I want to help people.
Kayama gets a gleam in her eye and Shota glares at her, and she doesn't say what she'd been thinking. He'd warned everyone before they'd arrived, not to mention Mirio or Eri. One damn thing at a time.
Well, I'm sure we will have lots of time to discuss your further education later once you are settled with Eraserhead.
Night Eye smiles, all charm, even in the face of Deku's clear uncertainty.
He has never sponsored a student before.
Only because Shinso wanted to get into UA on his own terms, and Hisashi had fought tooth and nail to be able to be the one to sponsor the kid instead. That had been a long few weeks of debate.
Anyway,
Shota cuts off more flailing from Deku.
We need to figure out how we handle our report and debrief as well.
At everyone's look, Shota shrugs again.
If I tell you verbatim I was transported to another dimension filled with spirits and monsters and literal fucking gods, you know me well enough to at least consider I might be telling the truth. Yes, we need to have my head checked and get Harigate in to look at my memories for tampering and a whole lot of it. We have due process for the ship for a reason.
He might expect them to give him some benefit of the doubt, but they're still going to check.
We need to think about the official records, because if that comes in clear and this report gets filed as is, the next person who sees it won't necessarily want to believe it, no matter who or what vouches for me. And I don't want to be dragging Deku through this process, or the public bullshit that might follow.
Records aren't sealed by default, after all. Heroes are supposed to have accountability. No one might especially want to look into this case, but if someone does, it can make a hell of a mess for all involved. There's silence as everyone seems to process that, and Shinso is the one to laugh.
My god, he's asking for permission to lie from the police detective with the truth quirk. I think we've reached peak irony.
Actually, I think it's only ironic if Tsukuuchi is the one to suggest it, Hisashi muses. I'm not sure it's subversive enough.
Do not get into an irony debate during a debriefing. I don't care how unusual this one is.
Shota cuts them off before they get started.
We have rules.
Kayama puts a finger on. You have rules about debating irony. Shota gives her the most world-weary look he can manage.
Don't even ask. They will go on for days.
I'm certainly not comfortable with this, Tsukuuchi agrees. Beyond the law, there are ethics to consider, and
how about Deku and I tell you just what went on for us while we were gone? You can note that down as a temporary statement pending external review to ensure our memories haven't been tainted, and we can at least get things moving.
Shota knows this will take time. They're not going to believe all at once. He wouldn't have, without a face-to-face introduction to Deku's world. All he needs for now is for them to be willing to humor him and not outright dismiss Deku the way they did at first.
All right, Tsukuyoshi says carefully. That's reasonable. Deku?
Shinso says, and for his son, the voice is gentle enough that Shota looks at Deku in worry and realizes the kid is clutching his hands together on the table and hunched in on himself.
Deku.
Shota echoes, reaching to touch because it seems to help the kid grounding himself in the here and now.
You all right?
I didn't mean to cause any trouble, Deku says to the table. I'm really sorry. I've made a mess for everyone and you all think Eraserhead is crazy, and it's my fault. Hey now, little listener! No one's allowed to call Shota crazy except me! Hizashi says before Shota can counter Deku's self-blame party fest. And if Shota says you've got spirits, then I'm going to believe him until someone gives me a good reason not to!
Deku, you want a drink?
Shinso asks, seemingly at random, but Shota knows his son, and random is not one of Shinso's character traits. Deku, likewise, seems surprised and confused.
I'm thirsty.
Shinso says like they're not in a debriefing, like Deku's not having a moment of self-pity and panic.
You look like Kiki needs some air. There's a vending machine.
Everyone else is staring at Shinso, but Shota looks at Deku and sees the almost feral panic there, and decides a breather is probably a good idea.
Go get a drink while I give them the rundown. Makes sense.
Shota assures when Deku looks at him in confusion.
Usually you give a statement separate so we don't color each other's story. With luck, they'll hear mine and decide they don't want to drag you through the same.
Deku shakes his head, but despite his protests, he's already pushing up from his chair. I promised I wouldn't run. And what about...
You'll come back in 10.
Shota nods his head toward the door. Shinso is already on his feet.
Go on, get something to drink and take a breather.
Deku hesitates for another moment and then looks up at nothing. Probably a spirit, now that Shota knows how to recognize the signs. And then he bows to everyone and very nearly runs out the door on Shinso's heels.
Aizawa,
Tsukuyoshi asks, curious.
Better to let him breathe and get a grip on things. Pretty sure this is the largest group of non-aggressive humans he's dealt with in a long time.
Shota shrugs.
Not like we can hold them if we wanted to even try besides. And I trust him to come back.
All right. The detective looks unconvinced, but doesn't argue. Let's start with your perspective on tracking down Demolition. Shinso leads Deku down the hall of the station, and outside, where just across the street there's a bank of vending machines. He watches Deku out of the corner of his eye and thinks about what he's heard and overheard since his dad called him into the station months ago. Deku still doesn't look like much. He's in one of Shinso's plain gray hoodies and a pair of black jogging pants that are rolled up at the cuffs. He isn't just small either. He acts small, which is different. Shinso's learned to look for that thanks to the training his dads have given him. Knows how to look at how people carry themselves and what that might mean. Deku holds himself like he's ready to run away and like he's expecting someone to hurt him at any moment. He proves that by hitching a shoulder higher as they stop at the machines and asking Shinso, "Are you going to hit me?" And it's so fucking sad because it's less of a question and more of a, let's get this over with. And isn't that so achingly familiar? Shinso just jabs an angry finger at the machines and ends up with a cold Boss coffee he presses against his forehead, against the headache that's building between his eyes.
Why would I hit you? And what do you want to drink?
Deku does the open mouth gape thing for a second and then ducks his head. Because I kidnapped your dad? Because I attacked you before? It takes effort not to roll his eyes, mostly because they just hurt.
Dad said you saved him, so I think I can forgive you for making us worry about him. And you didn't attack me. You freaked out when I used my quirk on you. Did something to my quirk when you freaked out. Then you hurt yourself, I think, and took off.
He leans against the machine and cracks the can open, eyeing Deku, who at least looks 10% less terrible.
Everyone looked for you, you know. There was a whole thing.
I was worried about that. Deku looks at the machines instead of at Shinso. I might have run away to meet a reward.
With the killer plants? How'd you get through them?
Shinso points at the bottled tea Deku's staring at.
What one?
The milk tea? Deku hesitates and points, but Shinso figures it's a good start. He remembers how hard it had been to ask Shota and Hisashi for anything at first. He hands the bottle over once it drops into the dispenser, and Deku clutches at it with both hands. Thanks!
The plants weren't really a problem. I avoided the worst areas, and they'd move if I asked them. So you talk to plants too?
Shinso wonders where on the list of weird shit this kid can do that would fall.
Do they talk back?
Deku looks at him sharply, narrowed eyes and shoulders hunched. Shinso just nurses his coffee and stands loose and easy. It's interesting. Deku's someone who knows his quirk and doesn't hesitate to talk to him, unlike some other kids their age. Maybe it's because he can stop it, however he did before. When Shinso doesn't say anything else, Deku finally sighs and cracks open his tea. Are you just checking to see if I'm crazy?
No.
Shinso shrugs.
Dad was talking to something before, and I assumed that was a spirit. I was wondering if they talk back.
Yeah? Deku says so quietly it's barely louder than the refrigeration of the machines. They do. Not... The plants didn't exactly, but they're from a spirit, so they listen. Spirits talk, though.
So what's yours like?
Shinso figures that's a safe question.
Right up until Deku flinches and hunches up again. Shit, sorry. Sore subject.
I don't have one, Deku says to his bottle of milk tea. I don't have a quirk. Even if I can do what I can do. Yours is a ball of blue fire. I don't know what he was originally. He pauses and then seems to listen to something before he continues. He says he's a Santomo. A ball of fire. Huh.
Cool.
Shinso says, clearly to Deku's surprise, because Deku's eyes go wide.
What?
You really think it's cool?
Yeah.
Another shrug, and no wonder his dad wants to look after Deku. He's more of a wounded animal than Shinso himself was.
I got a ball of fire for a quirk thing. That's cool. Could have been, I don't know, a cow. A trash can. A banana.
Deku snickers, which is good. Shinso was starting to worry the confused, sad, concerned look was a permanent thing on his face. I've never met a banana spirit!
Sounds like I missed the bullet of the trash can then.
Which he would not have at all been surprised about, knowing his luck.
Was his ashes a parrot or that underwater shrimp thing that shoots air bullets?
Because he's loud? Deku, still smiling, shakes his head. Quirks don't always match their spirit, actually. His is a kappa.
What, the cute turtle thing?
Deku frowns. I don't think I'd call them cute, actually. They're pretty creepy looking.
I'll have to take your word for it.
Shinso finishes his coffee and crushes the can in one hand.
So, can I ask some more questions?
Deku nods, still nursing his milk tea, but the wildness around his eyes seems to be a bit less crazy. Sure. I mean, it's good if you want to know things. If Aizawa was serious about me staying with you guys for a bit. I mean, I'm sorry if you think I'm invading. I didn't ask, he just insisted and...
I'm adopted,
Shinso says to cut off this particular stream of self-depreciation.
I get the feeling Dad insisted with you the way he did with me. He promised to chase me down if I ran away.
Another mouth-open gape thing from Deku, and then he laughs. Really? I'm stuck for a bit. I don't think I could try to travel out for at least a few days. Getting us to the spirit realm was, a lot.
So, you're stuck with us for a while?
Shinso nods.
Tell you what, trade you a question for a question then.
Maybe it'll help Deku feel a little less trapped by all this. Sure. You go first.
How'd you break my quirk?
It's still Magnum!
Oh! Of all things, Deku blushes. He rolls up his left sleeve, and there on his arm are a collection of silvery scars, but he specifically points to two large puncture-looking ones on his forearm, and then rotates his arm to show two more underneath. I wasn't worried because no one would give me anything to write with, so Tamama... Aizawa's spirit. She bit me to wake me up.
Wait, she bit you?
Shinso remembers Deku holding his arm, and there was blood on the floor after, but he thought it had come from the way Deku's hand had burned.
Well, what about the burn?
That was... me not thinking? Deku shrugs again, looking down. I might have physically grabbed your spirit as well as, mentally. And he's made out of fire. There probably isn't an appropriate response to that, especially since Shinso can see the scars on Deku's palm.
Ouch.
He settles with, which seems to work. Deku laughs.
So what do you want to know?
Do you... Deku stops, and then gulps at his tea like it's something stronger. Do you think that they'll believe us? I mean, Aizawa believes me now, but, well, he didn't until he saw.
And I can't do that for everyone. I barely did it for him. Don't know if I can speak for everyone.
Shinzo tosses his can into the recycling and Deku follows suit with his bottle.
But we watched you float in midair and then right while you were knocked out. So there's clearly something going on, and
Shinzo considers it.
I thought about it before. Last time at the station, I mean. Quirks are weird, right? So maybe your quirk is weirder than most. Maybe there aren't spirits and magic, and like Dad says, we just call it how your quirk manifests. Maybe there are spirits and things only you can see. Nobody can tell you how your quirk works, even if you don't call it a quirk. And calling it crazy seems about as crappy as calling you a villain if you haven't done anything wrong. You know what's going on, and it makes sense to you. So I'm gonna believe you and Dad until someone gives me a reason not to. I think everyone else will do the same.
Deku shoves his hands in the pockets of his borrowed sweater, and Shinzo recognizes that as well. He still does it sometimes when he feels too exposed and doesn't want anyone to see him clench his fists enough for the nails to dig in and hurt. Deku then scuffs the sidewalk with one ready shoe, and Shinzo watches him pull himself together. It's an entire process. Deku breathes in, then out, then in. Then his back straightens, and he stands tall, blinking until his eyes are clear and determined, expression set into something fierce and steadfast. "Okay," he says, to Shinzo, to the world. He nods. "I think I can do this." It's an impressive act. Shinzo is going to give him credit for that, and not call out how he bets Deku's hands are still clenched in his pockets. Gotta give him his defense mechanisms after all.
Cool. Let's head back and see just how bad your adventures went over with the detective. I don't think he's paid enough to be our liaison at this rate.
Deku smiles at the description. "Can I ask another question?" he ventures as they head toward the station.
Shoot.
"Why'd you, ask me out here, since it wasn't to punch me?"
Do people punch you a lot?
Shinzo has to ask. Dad will want to know. "Not so much these days." Deku hunches his shoulders again slightly. "But when I was younger, I think. My memory is a bit fuzzy in spots."
Well, I'm not going to punch you, and neither will either of my dads. Hisashi is the world's biggest pushover, if you look at him sadly, and Shota is an expert in making you feel like you've been punched just by looking at you disappointedly, and maybe making you run laps until you puke. But you're not in class, so we won't do that, and he's otherwise really great. Which doesn't mean he's not going to end up running laps for Dad when he's being Aizawa-sensei, but that's later. Anyway, you look like you were about to panic and needed some air. I figured the adults could do their thing for a few minutes while we got some drinks. You didn't eat much for dinner. "Oh, thanks." Deku doesn't seem nearly as reassured as Shinzo thinks he ought to be, but he's a nervous kid. He'll figure them out soon enough. He just needs to find Dad asleep with at least 3 cats on him, and it'll be obvious. He'd learned that when he'd been lost and messed up and very nearly on his own. You could tell a lot about trusting a person if their animals trusted them. The adults are all waiting for them, and it's somehow less scary after talking to Hitoshi. Izuku settles in and gives his version of events with everyone listening, and no one calling him crazy. The detective just takes notes and frowns a lot. Probably because everything he says reads as true. When they finish, Yamada and Midnight both look uncomfortable, and the detective looks like he's trying not to show any emotion, but it's done, and whatever they decide to do is for them to decide. Izuku has to wait and see, sure, but that's been his whole life in a way. A few more days is all the same to him. They're bringing in an expert, Miyu Harige, in a day or 2. Aizawa tells him as Midnight gives her farewells. She'll be able to get a read on what we told them. You don't have to see her if you don't want to. I can do it for the both of us. Izuku blinks at him. What's her quirk? A type of psychic reading, Aizawa tells him. She can tell if someone has had their memories altered and how, and with permission, can share memories with others. But you gave up a memory to Eggpack, Izuku points out, wondering if this would make everything moot. How nuanced is her quirk? Enough that I trust her to vouch for me, Aizawa reassures him. She works for the police mostly in cases dealing with people who are too traumatized to testify or are unable to for medical reasons. As difficult as matters might be to believe, Aizawa has made a strong case. We certainly have no other more concrete alternatives to present at the moment, and you, young man, are not under any form of arrest or charge. As long as you agree to stay with Aizawa and Yamada, I will agree not to overtly bring in services.
Tsukuuchi meets Izuku's gaze evenly.
Simply for protocol, nothing else. We will be looking into the people who were supposed to look after you.
Aizawa intones with such darkness to his voice, Izuku finds himself looking up at them in surprise.
Because I want their care to be fully investigated. I'm not going to pretend what you told me didn't happen, but you don't have to go back there or anywhere else. Alright, Pablo child?
And somehow, Izuku believes him. He nods. All right.
That's for tomorrow,
Aizawa says, then nods at Tsukuuchi.
Can you give us a ride to the hospital?
Hospital? All of that certainty and trust evaporates as he suddenly wonders if they're going to try to lock him up again, even after he just heard Aizawa say otherwise. What for? Aizawa looks at him and looks so tired and sad. Izuku feels bad for not trusting in him.
There's a little girl there who needs my help,
he says quietly, like he knows what Izuku's thinking.
She could probably use yours, too. I'll explain on the way. Hizashi will take Shinso home.
Needs help, Izuku thinks, and he straightens himself up and meets Aizawa's gaze directly. Right, let's go then. They part ways and leave the station far better than the first time Izuku had been inside. Aizawa sits in the back of the car again with them, instead of next to Tsukuuchi, which seems maybe rude to the detective, but he doesn't seem to mind. Izuku feels a bit embarrassed about it, but it's obvious why when Izuku spends the entire 40-minute ride to the hospital explaining just what happened with the villain known as Overhaul and just where those quirk-destroying bullets came from. From who? Aizawa looks somehow like he's aged 10 years in the car ride by the time he's done.
I wanted to wait until at least tomorrow before I dropped this on you,
he tells Izuku, intense in a way that contrasts how he's usually so flat and laid back.
The last thing I want is you getting this in your head that you're only important because of this. You saved my life, and you are a teenager who needs to be looked after, and none of that has anything to do with what you might be able to do. All right?
Aizawa's glare is so intense that all Izuku can do is nod.
Good, because I'm not joining the apparently long list of people in your life who have used you for what you can do. I'm going in to help Eri. I'd like it if you took a look at her and see what you think. If you think you can help her. If you want to. That's your choice, and no one will force you.
On one hand, Izuku really, really appreciates all of this. It means something to have an adult be so intent on him with kindness, to have someone say, you have value that isn't your ability to help us. Because that's the only reason the spirits ever interact with him. It means something that Aizawa worried he'd take this to mean that his offer to help him is just temporary. Izuku can see how he might have gone that way, might have thought that, if Aizawa hadn't flat out stomped that idea into the ground. It's nice. It's also kind of pointless. Eraserhead? He says, and he uses the name intentionally. You said there's a little girl who needs help. That's all you need to say. Of course I'll help. If I can. I'll do everything I can. It's what I do. There is no choice at all, not really. There's a whole host of expressions that flash across Aizawa's face, and Izuku feels almost sorry for him. He pats him on the knee just once, twice, feeling awkward but not being sure what else to really say. It's okay. Even if you did only want me for my help, I'd help. And I believe you that you don't. Okay? Aizawa's the one who doesn't know what to say, it seems, because he just nods. Then they pull into the hospital, and they don't have to say anything else at all. Checking into the hospital is interesting. It's part normal hospital, part hero hospital, and there's a whole second set of security checks and so many spirits around. It feels like being in the marketplace all over again. Tamamo Mei hadn't followed immediately, and Izuku had tucked himself as close to Aizawa's side as possible as they walked the halls because to his eyes the space was full. They're all reacting to him too. Word probably got around, knowing how spirits talk, and there's the stag he'd seen before, towering and blocking the whole hallway, antlers and sides trailing moss and vines and bits of faded ribbon. What are you here for, Defiler? Izuku has to stop because he can't squeeze by. There's a cart with bedding on the wall and a pair of nurses to the side, and the stag is huge. Tamamono Mae's human asked me to look out Eri, he explains. The little girl who needs help with her quirk. I'm not here to start a fight or hurt anyone.
Deku,
Aizawa says when he realizes he's stopped. I'm blocked, Izuku admits apologetically. Please let me by. He considers the spirit and frowns, suddenly worried. Is your human all right? The spirit stares at him for a long moment and then shakes his head. She is recovering. The pollen from the plants made her ill. Izuku nods. I'm sorry about that. Do you want me to tell the Razorhead? The stag's head tilts. Why do you ask for permission? Because it might be private? Deku shrugs. I don't usually tell anyone anything unless I think it's important enough to ignore privacy. He doesn't know what the spirit thinks of that. He simply turns in place, antlers missing Izuku's head by inches. Do what you will. You will not find welcome from Mizuchi here. The stag fades away in a few sure steps, and the spirits watching them seem to follow his lead. It's suddenly very, very quiet in the hall.
Deku.
Izuku blinks and Aizawa is in front of him, worried.
Can I help?
I think it's okay. He wonders who Mizuchi is because it doesn't feel like it's the stag's name. Though the hero, the woman who was at Minami, I think she's here. Her spirit was. Aizawa nods.
Tsukuyoshi told me the pollen from the plants affected her more than expected because of her quirk. She's expected to make a full recovery.
That's good. Izuku feels bad about making them stop in the hallway. She was nice. I'm glad she'll be all right. Let's keep going. I think her spirit just wanted to maybe check I wasn't here to make trouble or something. Aizawa nods and leads them on. The heroes have their own ward, and Eri is there instead of a children's ward because of her quirk. Hero wards are better set up to deal with destructive quirks that might get out of hand. Still, there are warning signs all over the door to the room Aizawa leads them to, and he stops in surprise when he sees someone outside the room.
Muriel?
Izuku looks at the teenager who's clearly a student. Blonde, well-built, instantly recognizable as the one who lost his pants at the sports festival. He's seated on a chair outside the door, which Izuku hasn't ever seen someone do in a hospital before. He looks tired. The smile that he plasters on his face doesn't meet his eyes. Aizawa-sensei! Mirio stands up, and in the hospital lights, he looks like he hasn't slept properly in days. You're all right!
Reports of my demise are always exaggerated. What are you doing here if Eri's quirk is out of control?
When she's awake, it's not so bad. Mirio waves his hands in front of him, trying to reassure him. But when she wakes up alone, she panics, and that's bad, so I promised I'd stay. The nurses left me because they can't give her any more quirk suppressants. They're starting to make her worse. Izuku winces at that. Quirk suppressants are dangerous in large doses, and the girl he sees through the large viewing window looks tiny. Ah! A nurse calls quietly, stepping on soft shoes quickly to meet their strange trio. Aizawa, thank goodness you're here. Young Eri's quirk.
I'll cancel it.
Aizawa assures her.
You can get your reading safely.
Thank you, the nurse says with relief. I think Dr. Ogata is happy to suddenly find himself 20 years younger, but some of us aren't quite old enough for that yet. Aizawa opens the door and heads inside, the nurse following. Mirio looks at Izuku for a moment, then brightens. His smile meets his eyes properly this time. Hey, wait! You're Deku, aren't you? I am? Izuku doesn't know how he's being recognized. How did you know? Are you kidding? Mirio chuckles. Everyone was talking about you when you showed up and started fixing quirks, and then you escaped the heroes in the precinct. There was a call out to try to find you, and then after everything with Overhaul and with Eri, well, I was hoping they'd be able to find you. Izuku looks over his shoulder where Eri is asleep and Aizawa is standing with his quirk activated, Tamamono Mae appearing at his side once more, probably to check on him. The nurse approaches Eri to check her vitals and change her IV. I'm sorry he was away for so long. I didn't mean to. It was complicated. Is she coming to me all right? Mirio's smile falters a bit. I hope so. She was doing well for a bit. We were really getting her to open up. And then her quirk started getting out of hand and it hurt her, and it's hard for the doctors to help her. Do you think you can do something? He asks, all bright intensity, and Izuku feels a bit overwhelmed by how eager he is. You were my friend before, Sun Eater. I'm sure he'd love to thank you again, by the way. And if you can help Eri.
Deku.
Aizawa calls. There's a sound of machinery beeping. He had stopped his quirk to blink, and Ares had flared up a moment later.
Sorry!
Izuku tells Mirio and dashes inside. Tamamo no Mae is settled against the wall, out of the way, and nods at him, but there's no sign of another spirit. Not from the nurse, Mirio, or Eri herself. Still, he can feel her quirk flare up and out. When Aizawa has to blink again, he reaches out to stop it before it can hurt anyone. White light flashes in front of his eyes. Izuku feels something slam against his chest, and then feels his back and head slam against the wall to the room. Everything hurts as he tries to pick himself up from the ground, only to find he can't. He can't because he's face to face with a giant white dragon! Deku! Aizawa calls out, and Izuku manages to wave a hand even while his chest is pinned. I'm okay! He gasps out, still a little breathless. Just caught off guard! Leave now, the dragon. And does Izuku want to bet this is Mizushi, the stag mentioned? Hisses into his face. It tries to bite him, and Izuku is treated to a look at the inside of his huge mouth and rows of teeth, but the words hold. The dragon pulls back to hiss again. I will not submit to the likes of you. I have no intention of making you do anything at all. Izuku can't be stabbed or bitten or burnt with the wards, but he's realizing being crushed isn't on the list of protections. It's hard to breathe. I'm just here to help her. She's in trouble. You have to know that. Your power is hurting her. Like the humans who have hurt her since the day she was born. The spirit scoffs. I will kill her before I let you enslave me. Izuku panics, trying to scrabble up. If you do anything to her, I will stop you. Listen to me. We don't have to do this. I'm here to help her. Please. Deku, what's going on? Mirio is at his side and trying to help him up, which only makes the dragon, which is bigger than the whole room, bear his weight down harder. What? Why can't I? Sensei! He's stuck! It's her quirk! Izuku manages voice then. I'm trying to convince him I'm not here to hurt him! Tamamo no Mae comes to kneel beside him. She's back in her human form in beautiful layers of silk kimono, and her lips red against her pale face. She sets a hand on his shoulder, and Izuku can breathe, even if he can't move. The dragon seems to be taken aback by her appearance. What are you doing here, Lady Kaio? What has he done to you? He saved my human and reconnected us with those who abused your human, used their power against us. Tamamo no Mae says, each word precise and perfect. He speaks the truth. He is here to help her, not harm you. You know what he can do! The dragon roars, enough for Izuku to flinch, though the kitsune is perfectly still. You know what was done to Ryujin! I know he is not responsible for others' actions, and his actions have been only what we could hope of him, and not what we have deserved. You know full well he could cast you off, and yet he does not. Why? The pressure on his chest lightens slightly, and the dragon's long maw is back in Izuku's face, terrifying and huge. But it sounds almost put out, almost childlike when it asks, why do you not fight? Just because I can do something doesn't mean I should. Izuku tries to sit up, but the dragon still doesn't seem interested in letting go. If you really, really force my hand, I'll do enough to get you to back off, but I'll never bind you. What I did when I was 8 years old was a mistake. I didn't know. The dragon huffs. Smoke curls from its nostrils, and the white scales along its body are pearlescent, the claw at the end of each toe looking like bands of polished silver. It's the most beautiful spirit Izuku's ever seen, and he's too overwhelmed to be properly terrified. Or maybe it's the threat of Eri that makes him keep his head. Either way, he meets the dragon's gaze as it stares into him like it can read his soul. I will swear to you that I'm not going to do anything but fix her quirk. That won't affect you. The worst I could do is disconnect the two of you, I think, and even then, your power would still return when she died. I can't sever you completely. I could just block her use of your power, and I'd only do that if she asked me to. And I will vouch for him, Tamamo no Mae says, elegant and ethereal. You know me, Mizushi. Would you insult me now? The dragon considers them both for a moment longer before it pulls away from Izuku and he can finally sit up. Very well. he says, as though the words take great effort to say.
If Lady Kaio vouches for you, I will watch you closely, child. If I feel you even begin to reach for me, you will regret it.
That's so obvious. Izuku just nods in agreement and lets Mirio help him up, feeling bad for the fact that this probably looks really, really weird to him. He staggers his way to the medical bed with help. The nurse looks just as uncomfortable as Mirio, but he guesses that Aizawa told her this was normal. Ha! Normal!
Okay, that was a lot,
he admits to Aizawa, who's looking like he expects answers. His chest feels like one big bruise, and so does his back, and he might actually have a concussion from hitting his head.
I'm just going to take a look now before anything else goes wrong, okay?
Sit down, Aizawa tells him, and Izuku nods but keeps to his feet for a moment longer. He takes Eri's bandaged arm and makes the quickest connection sigil in his life on the back of her hand, then his, and then just sits right where he is on the floor. The floor is as good a seat as anything else, and her poor quirk feels awful this up-close and personal. He feels Tamamo no Mei move behind him and support him, which is a relief. Izuku doesn't try to think about holding himself up as he throws himself through the connection and into the pulsating, warped, and sickly power that is Eri. Izuku's been in dark oceans and fields of golden grass, in towers of books and endless mazes of roses and thorns. Everyone is different when he feels what they are, and how their quirk connects to them, how their spirit and core connect, and what that power means. Eri is the first person who has felt brittle. She's a field of snow, a desert of dry air and fragile cold, and everywhere are razor-thin spikes of ice, like an eternal field of porcupine needles. The air sings with the sound of creaking, cracking ice. Everything is white, and everything hurts. Izuku brushes against one spike, and it burns him. It's so cold. The bruises in his chest feel 1,000 times worse here, and the air seems too thin to breathe. No wonder her quirk is hurting her, he thinks, horrified. He does not know what was done to her to make it like this, but it feels almost as though her quirk, her connection to her spirit, has been shattered and remade over and over and over again until it's nothing but this field of disconnected threads, dangerous and deadly and overwhelming her. There is no path forward. Izuku looks at the mess all around him and knows there's no quick fix. He can't do this at once. He's never seen anything like this before, but he knows if he tried to do this all at once, he'd die. He'd run empty, and even then it wouldn't be finished. This will take work. He sits mentally on the tiny bank of ice he's landed on, a few square feet of safety against the jagged outcrops, and he pours warmth into the ground under him. Shota is going to have a lot of explaining to do, but if this stabilizes Eri, it will be worth it. When Tsukuyoshi had told him of Eri's condition, there had been no time to wait. And now he's beyond grateful he'd brought Deku along, because where before canceling her quirk had reset it for a time, allowing the nurses to do their work. Apparently his 4-day jaunt away and the subsequent reliance on suppressants instead had done more damage than good. When he'd blinked, her quirk had flared so quickly he'd only just managed to keep it from hitting himself or the nurse. Now he watches as her breathing stabilizes and her blood pressure settles into a far normal range. The nurse runs a hand over the small girl's forehead and blinks in surprise. "Her fever," she says, then whips out a thermometer, which is placed in Eri's ear, and reads it with clear surprise. "She's dropped 2 degrees already. What is he doing?" Deku's on the floor by Shota's feet, swaying slightly with his eyes closed, and with no indication he's doing anything at all, if not for Eri's quick recovery.
"He's got a quirk manipulation quirk," he tells her. "He could fix when a quirk is overactive. I brought him in to consult."
She frowns, lips pressed flat. "You realize that quirk use like this is supposed to be run past her doctors first."
"I know."
Shota does in fact know how many rules he's just broken.
"I'll take responsibility later. It was more important to make sure she would recover."
"Well, if she does, it will have been worth it," the nurse agrees. They wait and watch, with Mirio at the foot of the bed, shifting from one foot to the other, and it's a tableau of silence bracketed by the sounds of the hospital until Deku groans and opens his eyes. Ah! Deku sways but seems to catch himself before he falls forward. What happened to her? Who did that? Shota doesn't need to ask what the kid means.
Chisaki. He used his quirk on her repeatedly.
Deku looks up at him, eyes glittering and black. Is he dead? Taken aback, Shota actually considers his answer and wonders just what Deku might do if he didn't like it. Thankfully, it isn't going to be an issue.
Yes.
Good! Deku spits the word with a twisted grimace, then covers his face with his hands and grinds his palms into his eyes. I did my best. I can't fix her in one go, Aizawa. She's so damaged inside. Her quirk is in pieces. I've never seen or felt anything like it at all. It's bad. It's really bad. He blinks up, and the green has returned to his irises, which makes Aizawa almost doubt anything had changed before at all. But I started. How is she?
Better,
Aizawa says. The nurse tisks. I'm going to bring Dr. Ogata in to decide that, she tells the room. None of you do anything else. That's an order! She leaves and Aizawa leans down to help Deku up, the boy seemingly made of overcooked noodles. Mirio brings a chair forward and they essentially pour him into it.
You okay, problem child?
Shota asks, worried about how shaky Deku seems. Yeah, I am. I'm just used a lot to do that. I didn't know what else to do, but I didn't have a lot left. I just need to sleep. He cracks a giant yawn and then looks at Mirio. Looks past Mirio, and the yawn turns into an open-jaw stare as Deku looks at nothing, and then to Mirio, and then back to nothing, and then back to Mirio once more. Why do you have All Might Spirit? Deku asks, voice cracking on the last note in something far too close to hysteria. Aizawa looks to the ceiling and finds absolutely no answers there. Fuck.